to Jesus historically have often been those who have been at the bottom of the well. And if you look at the history of people of color in this country has treated people of color as if they were at the bottom of the well. Not only were Africans enslaved, we know that slavery lasted for hundreds of years, but that slavery also meant that they had no rights to speak of. You know, Thomas Jefferson declared in the Declaration of Independence, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." None of that had to do with people of color. People of color were rather defined by a comment that was made by a justice of the Supreme Court in the Dred Scott decision in the 1850s, in which he argued that people of color, people of African American descent, had no rights that whites were bound to respect. And yet, despite the fact that African Americans were slaves, despite the fact that the law defined them as property and not as people, and the Constitution referred to them as 3/5 of people, all of that is documented. Despite the fact that people of color had no right to even have say-so over their children, and their children could be separated from them, despite the fact that people of color could not legally marry and form families that had any lawful meaning, despite those facts, people of color kept praying to God and asking God to help them and heal them of the problem that they had here in this country. And as they prayed to God, they believed that God would heal them. But not only that, they didn't just have faith to believe. They also understood that they had to press through that crowd, that there was something that they had to combine with their faith, and that something was works. They had to keep working towards their freedom. So freedom didn't just come because black people believed it would come. It came because black people ran away from their enslavement. It came because free black people worked towards the freeing of their brothers who were in chains. It came because they kept pressing and pressing and pressing. They made assumptions that when the Civil War came, that those soldiers in blue were coming to liberate them, even though nobody told them that that was the case. They assumed that God had put them there to free them. My whole point is this: faith without works is dead.
Amen.
You can believe all you want, but until you're ready to put an action plan behind those beliefs, nothing will come of it. Because it wasn't enough for this woman to just believe that Jesus could change her life. She had to press through a crowd and get close enough to touch the hem of his garment. And in that way, people of color have conducted their lives and worked hard to try to relieve themselves of the challenges of unfairness in this country. Story after story, during slavery, after slavery, that has been a mode of operation for people of color throughout this nation's history. Works without faith, faith without works is dead. But another thing that must be remembered, that you cannot work effectively if you have no faith. Faith is critical to being able to work towards a goal. Think about it practically. If you want to accomplish anything meaningful, it's probably going to be hard.
Yes.
I tell this to my students all the time, who always ask me, "Dr. Robinson, why do you have us reading so much?" I said, well, it's history. You have to read to understand it. Well, why is the reading so hard? I said, because it's meaningful. And anything meaningful requires effort. You know, even if you go on a diet and you try to work and work on your body, that's hard work. That's not easy work. That's why people don't like to do it, because it's hard work. But if it's meaningful work, and anything that's meaningful is hard. Now, unless you have a vision of what you can become, it's hard to stay with work that is hard. Y'all miss that. Yes. Unless you have a vision of what you can become, it's hard to stay with with the work that's required. And it's that vision of what is possible that is your faith and what you can become. Amen. And so this woman had the faith to believe that Jesus could heal her. And she pressed, she worked to make it happen. And that is a central theme of Black history, the entirety of Black history. Faith without works is dead, but no faith, no works. You can't make it happen. And then there are other messages in this story that are really, really important for us to understand. Other messages. One other message that is critical is that you have to really have a sense that God exists and that He can make a change in your life. And it can't be this superficial sense. You have to believe that God can help you to achieve anything in your life that you are willing to work towards. You know, so often I think throughout when we think about some of the challenges that African Americans particularly have in this country today, sometimes I think it's because we don't have a real sense of who we are. Like what our history has been telling us. I'll tell you one because I'm in the field of education. One of the things that you know we know about is that there's this gap between the majority and between African Americans, and they call it the achievement gap. And that's an educational, title, meaning that African Americans, in terms of standardized tests, in terms of other metrics, don't tend to do as well as the majority. And some people say, well, the tests are biased, and they are. There are some biases in the tests. But it's also that there seems to be a lack of valuing among some of our African American students of the importance of education. A lack of value. And that lack of valuing tells me instantly that you absolutely don't understand your history. Because people of color throughout history were looking to get more education, not less. Looking to learn how to read better, not less. There were always famous people, or people who weren't famous at the time, but are now famous, who really had no formal training, but they learned on their own because it was so important to them. And there are things that you do every day that you probably don't stop and think, a Black person made this. I mean, your ability to just look at anything in a darkened room is because a Black person created the first light bulb. His name was Lewis Latimer. I mean, just the power of knowing that a Black person was responsible for making one of the first sprinklers. So you couldn't drive your car, it wasn't for a Black person, because an engine that learned a lubricating device that was created to allow engines to operate was created by Elijah McCoy. And you've ever heard that statement, the real McCoy? That's Elijah McCoy, that's a Black person. My point is that